Well, hello, all you happy people. How you doing? That's right. I am back for another episode of the Dan Wickline Show. Me and my buddy Clark, Kal-El, Superman. Yeah, I couldn't resist. So now I've got the two of them. Now I know they're not going to be together in the same universe, and I'm okay with that. I think that's a good idea. But those are the DC movies we have right now, so I'm all for it. So, all right, guys, how you doing tonight? Things have been absolutely crazy of late, and I wasn't sure I was going to do a show tonight, so I didn't hype it or promote it. So I won't be surprised if hardly anybody jumps in. But yeah, I just wanted to come on and chit chat a bit. I have been working on a few things. If you follow the stuff I do with Ethereal Comics, I just did the third Crimson Sales script. That's quite a wild book. I always finish that one thinking I should probably go to church, go to confession, say a few things. I don't, but, the thought's there. And I've got Morgana to do next, Morgana issue 3. So both of them are still moving along. I've got some other books I'll be doing for them coming up. So yeah, I'll be doing regular stuff for Ethereal. I'm hoping to get some more comic work out there. I haven't really been good at networking again because I haven't had a chance to really get out there. Hey Ed, good to see you. Haven't been able to get out there and really network that much. I'm hoping to start being able to do that some more. At least dropping some emails, kind of rattling some trees, see if there's any work out there. But Ethereal's always been good to me since I hooked up with them a couple years back. And again, so Crimson Sales 3 is done and turned in. They're working on the art for 2. So the Kickstarter for 3 will probably happen in the next couple of months. And then Morgana 3 will also be happening. I've got some other books, like I said, I'm talking to them about. Maybe taking over a couple of the existing series. I have another series I have been talking to them about, kind of a post-apocalyptic thing. Meets a Russ Meyer film. We'll see how that works out. But the other thing I am working on is Obsidian Moon, and I've had a really good burst of creativity on that lately. I write chapter by chapter. That's kind of my thing. And I write in thirds. So when I sit down to do a book, I have an idea what I want to happen in the novel, but I don't outline the entire book because I have found that if I'm really hitting my stride writing, the characters kind of take over. And the Lucius Fogg books is the best example of that because it's a first-person narrative. It's Jimmy Doyle telling a story. So in a lot of ways, Jimmy Doyle's writing the book. Jimmy Doyle is telling you a story. This is what happened to him. This is one of his latest cases or one of the case files, and he's telling the story. And in doing it that way, I have to be able to let Jimmy tell the story the way he thinks it needs to be told and to do the things that Jimmy would do. And I know that sounds absolutely crazy that I'm talking about a story I'm writing. But if I try to force it in a certain direction, and as I'm doing it, the character seems to be fighting against it, that's because the character is being the character. The character is acting how it is that I created it. So if he's fighting against what I'm doing, if it's not flowing, it means that I'm writing against the character. And if I'm doing that, then I'm not telling a good story. Jimmy needs to be able to be Jimmy. Let Jimmy be Jimmy. And that was always when I knew that things were really starting to click on the book, is when I could just sit down and just like, oh, I need to tell this kind of scene now to move the story forward. But no real plan, no real, well, these are all the beats I want to hit in this next chapter. When I just know that, oh, I want to have a scene between Jimmy and Seabass because I want this information to come out. Everything else in the scene happens naturally, happens when I put those two characters in a scene. And that happened to me yesterday. And the character of Seabass grew. There was more depth to the character added in the scene that I hadn't necessarily planned to do. But then when I think about where I'm going with the book, it made perfect sense. These were things that really needed to happen. So like I said, letting Jimmy be Jimmy and letting the characters be themselves, when that happens and the book changes as I'm writing it, then I know I'm kind of clicking on all cylinders. And that's what's happened this weekend. I finished one chapter, completely wrote another, and I'm halfway through a third, all in the last 3 days. And it's been a while since I've been able to do that much production straight. So, and I know that I'm getting to the end of the first act. And it's a big thing because this book is going to take a drastic change. The first 3 Lucius Fogg books are kind of on their own. They're their own thing. Where the 4th one is the start of Obsidian Moon. And while they're still the same series, some major things need to happen to make it, to kick off Obsidian Moon, to make it part of the bigger universe. And while I had already embedded the things I needed to make that happen, there wasn't originally the plan. Obsidian Moon wasn't a plan. Obsidian Moon is the realization that I have been creating a series of concepts or properties that really all do tie together. That, you know, as much as I never considered myself someone who wrote a certain genre, I've kind of backed into that. When you look at Unravel and Forever Shadow and Poseidon's Wake and what used to be Bloodlust, now Viral, and Fog, and they all, and Brawl, they all exist in the same type of genre. So it makes sense that they all fit together, but it was never my intention. But once I realized it, it was like, oh, there's a puzzle here and it all fits together. But Fog needs some tweaks that I think are natural flow for where the story was going to go anyway. But those tweaks all are going to happen in a very dramatic way in this new book. And that's going to happen between Act 1 and 2. And I'm writing to that. I haven't given Salome, my editor, any of this stuff yet. No one else has read it. And that's because I kind of want this act to be complete before anybody touches it, anybody looks at it. And that's where I'm at right now. I am a chapter and a half away from completing the act and making the big change. And I'm nervous about it. I'm excited about it. Yeah. Oh, Ed has a question. Do we need to read up all the Fogg novels prior to Obsidian? If so, do you know where we can get digital copies? Okay. To answer that question, I am writing Chaos Game, the new book, for people who haven't read previous Fogg books. I am making sure that whatever information you need will be there, will be given to you. That said, there is this rich world that's already been created, and it will be much more fulfilling if you do read the three books first. So you don't have to, but I think you'll enjoy it more, if that makes sense. I always write with the Stan Lee quote in my head, which is every comic is somebody's first. Every novel is somebody's first. You should be able to pick up any book and read it, even if it's part of a series, and get enough information to know what's going on. Now, it doesn't need to like have a giant recap or anything like that, but if you're going to reference something specific, then you should explain it to the new reader briefly. Not enough that previous readers or ongoing readers are going to go, oh, again, I need to know. But enough that they get the information they need. So I am writing Chaos Game that way. But that said, there are a lot of little gems in there that will become much clearer or be more fun if you do read the previous books. Now, fascinating thing, but as for getting them, they are available on Amazon, both digitally and in print. So you can get them as ebooks through Amazon, or you can get them in print. If you have a problem with that, Ed, reach out to me and we can try to figure something else out. But that's probably the best way to go about it. And of course I get a cut off of everything Amazon sells. So, and I've self-published these. So if you're buying them through Amazon, it's like you're buying them, one step from me, not like, I'm writing for Random House and Random House is then selling them to Amazon. So your money goes to Amazon and then a part of it goes to Random House and then a part of it goes to me. That middle step is out of there. So, but yeah, so that's the, I do think you'll enjoy, especially you, Ed. Can you buy a PDF straight from me? Because of the deal I have with Amazon, I'm not supposed to do that. But let me think on that. Okay, Ed? If you haven't heard from me by next week and I'm doing a show, remind me. But yeah, we'll figure something out, Ed. And what's funny is I think I told you guys, or at least I posted about it, that my doctor started reading, the guy that's doing my leg wounds, he started reading the books and just devoured them. Went through all three novels, got them all off of Amazon, and just loved them. And like I said, read all three books in like 4 weeks. And this is with traveling and stuff in between. And that really kind of, got me excited because, when somebody gets a hold of you and tells you that they like the stuff, it kind of enthuses you. reinvigorates you. But that happened again with someone else, someone who had saw me post about the Fog books and bought one offline and read it and took the time to write it. And this is somebody who works in the comic industry who I know, but not well. I've interviewed once, we've talked a few times, that type, and they reached out to me and told me how much they liked it and how they were going to get the other two books, and they really loved that universe. And since then, I've had a few more people just come out of the woodwork, like, hey, I'm reading these and I'm really enjoying them. Are there going to be more? And now I can say, yeah, I'm currently working on it. I'm 23,000 words into the next book. I'm almost a third of the way through the next book. So that's really cool. Even my mother. Yeah, your mother always loves what you do, most of the time. My mother the other day said that she didn't remember if she had read the last Fog book. So I dug out a copy and I gave it to her, and I didn't think she'd actually read it, but I put it out there, and yeah, she did. She had run out of her crosswords and sat down and read all of Educated Corpses and was talking about how much she liked them. Hey, Mr. Nope, how you doing? Good to see you. So yeah, that's just really cool to have people finding these books again. And yeah, I'm working on them now and I'm talking about them now. But again, it feels like they were from so long ago. And then today, I was working on something that I wanted to tie into a specific part of the last book, the third book. So I pulled it up, and the first thing I did was Copilot, Microsoft's AI program. Every time you pull up something, it's like, would you like me to summarize this document for you? And I always ignore it. Well, this time I went, sure. Go ahead. It's an entire novel in this document. Let's see what you can do. And it wrote up a 2-page summary. And in doing so, it reminded me of things I had forgotten. Characters I had forgotten, because this is a book I wrote. Educated Corpses is a book I wrote 10 years ago. So it's been a long time since I've worked on Fog. So I ended up rereading some chapters in it, and I found myself, and this is going to sound horrible, but I found myself getting kind of caught up in the story again. Because, again, I've got in my head what happened, but I don't remember all the details. And I'm someone that when I write the story, I give it to Salome. She goes through and edits it, points out what doesn't work, what does work, or if something doesn't work, she points it out. And then I go through and I fix things that she says don't work, and I make the edits and stuff. And that's pretty much where it sits. I don't do, I don't reread and go over chapter and chapter and over and over again, because I would get lost in it. I would constantly be trying to change it and make it better and stuff like that. And of course, we talked last time I did a show. That was my microphone. Last time I did a show, I talked about how, those voices in your head that start telling you everything you do is horrible. You're a terrible writer. This is crap. That's crap. Those voices come up too. So it is easier for me to write that way. Tell the story. Salome does her magic. I fix it up, and that's it. I don't stress it. I don't nitpick it. And that's the only way it would ever get done if I don't do it that way. So for me to go back 10 years later and start reading a couple chapters, it's really interesting because it's not up here anymore. You know, certain details are, but certain things aren't. So getting to read certain scenes and stuff, it's like I'm reading a book by somebody else. And it's kind of cool because I actually like it. It's fun to read. It's fun to read Jimmy. So it's kind of funny. It says it's funny. I do the same things when I write my lecture notes. Exactly. You know, you move on and we are our own worst critics, most people. So to have every once in a while go back and reread something and like it. Now I've gone back and reread some things I've done and went, oh, how did I let that get by? And I'll tell you the truth, none of those have been anything that Salome worked on. Again, Salome is a goddess. She really is. She is an editing goddess. And I don't know what I would do without her, just so you know. And this is, you know, I'm engaged to Lisa. She's married to Tim over in Spain. She is absolutely wonderful. She is family. She is half of what a Dan Wickline novel is. So if she ever actually gets her book out there, you guys will need to all go read it because it's going to be awesome. Now she's much more the meticulous, you know, where I'm just, you know, she's a writer. She is a trained writer with multiple master's degree in literature. I am a storytelling hack that just kind of found my voice and would be doing this around the campfire if I didn't have a computer to type on. Mr. Nope says, I cringe at anything I wrote when I read it years later. I have those too. So again, maybe what you need to do is let Salome look at it, fix it up, and then later you'll love it. That's at least what I think. So anyway, needless to say, I'm getting really excited for what's going on with Chaos Game. It says, I love your Headless Horseman series you did a while back. That's what turned me on to your work. Oh, really? Well, thank you. I'll give you a little inside baseball on that one. I wrote that a long time ago now, but I needed a good relationship between the two main characters. So what I did was I based them on myself and Lisa. And Lisa and I don't think we were together at that point. But the history, Lisa and my history is really weird because we've dated multiple times through our life in our teens, in our 20s, in our 30s, in our 40s, and in our 50s now. So I kind of have to look at the map and go, let's see, we were not together there. We were together there. So, but that one, a lot of the female lead in that book is Lisa's personality. So, and that was a fun book to write. I did a lot of fun stuff for Zenescope. They would come to me and go, we want to do a story about blank, and here's a loose idea of how we want it to go. They'd give me like a paragraph. And I would go, okay. And I would stare at that for a few minutes, and I'd try to find the story I wanted to tell within that. And I would use their parameters to guide it, but I would tell my story. And that's what I did with them. So anytime you see a book that I wrote from Zenoscope, it always says story by Joe Bruscia or Ralph Tedesco or some other names that got on there too, written by me. And that's what it was, is they would give me the universe points, and then I would kind of weave a story in there, But I did a lot of weird ones for them. They came to me one time and said, we want to do a swap between Grim Fairy Tales and Sinbad. And I was doing the Sinbad story. They said, can you do a Sinbad story in Grim Fairy Tales, tie it to one of the fairy tales? I said, I can try. So I went out and looked at the original Grim Fairy Tales, and I found this really, really obscure Grimm fairy tale called The Three Snake Leaves. And I'm like, well, I know they're never going to use that one. And I was able to use that to actually tell the origin story of one of my Sinbad characters named Wilhelm. And so that worked out really well. Thank you, Ed. Ed says he also likes the Sinbad books. Sinbad was a test for me. I had already been writing. I've been doing my own stuff, but this was early on in me doing work for other people. And they had come to me and they said, we want to do a Sinbad story where Sinbad is kind of a cross between James Bond and Captain Jack Sparrow. And I thought, that's really weird, but let me see what I can do. So I pitched this idea, and one of the things I wanted to do was create my own crew for him. And in my mind, it was going to be my version of the X-Men. Each one would kind of have their own unique gift. They would be a traveling circus and that traveled on a boat. And Sinbad would take over the boat and the circus, and that would become his crew. And I pitched the idea, and they went along with all that. But again, I wasn't quite sure my voice on that. And then we got to an issue with a dragon. And Sinbad was trying to save this girl while the dragon was attacking. They got knocked off the boat, and he finds himself holding one of the fins on the back of the dragon. The girl is in his arm, and he's hanging on. And I wrote a line in there, and it was my John McClane moment. It was a little bit breaking the fourth wall. It was a little out there. And he yells at the girl, stop squirming. This isn't nearly as easy as I make it look. And I liked the line, I got a note back from Joe Bruscia, the president of Zenoscope, and it simply showed that line and a quote this, and he said, more like this. And I'm like, yes, sir. And that's when I really got the voice for Sinbad and really started having fun with that. And that is probably one of the longest series I got to write, because we did 13 or 14 episodes or issues, one of which Joe wrote and I did the corresponding Grim Fairy Tales for. And then there was one issue that was going to be a standalone, and it's written, it's drawn, but it never came out. So there's a 14th issue that never saw print. But yeah, that was the Sinbad, the Arabian Nights. Yeah. So I love writing. And if somebody comes to me and says, hey, we've got a book we want you to do, I'm going to find my story to tell within that book. Whether it's Sinbad or Headless Horseman or Shadowhawk or, Steve Niles came to me and had a few different ideas. And, there was a book he was working on with somebody else about a Bigfoot monster hunter. So it was a Bigfoot that hunted other monsters called Savage. And I found my voice in that one too and just had a lot of fun. So, that's kind of my thing. I love telling stories. So, if any publisher came to me and said, okay, we want to do a book like X, Y, or Z, and I'm going to find my way to do it. That's how Lucius Fogg came about. I never wanted to do magic stories. It's like Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange was one of the few characters I figured I would never write because I didn't do enough drugs to make magic work in my stories. At least that's what I used to think. And I had done a graphic novel for a company called Cellar Door Publishing. The book was called I Am Spartacus. And it was this one-shot graphic novel that I loved. It was an idea that I'd had for a while. I did it with an artist named Ilkka Lasonen. And it's just a terrific little book. Well, Jade Dodge is the publisher at Cellar Door, had this idea to do digital chapter books where, like the Spiderwick Chronicles or something like that, where they put a new chapter out each week for a small fee. And they asked if I could do a book that was like 10 chapters. I'm like, yeah, I could do something. And at the time, I've always been a detective fan, stuff like that. So I was big into Nero Wolfe at the time. And I thought, well, what if I took the relationship of Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin, and I used that to make my own detective pairing, but I made it a cult. What if I made it supernatural? That was my rough way into it, because a buddy of mine, this goes way back when I first started doing freelance work, and I had a friend working at Metal Hurlant, and he was telling me, hey, we're doing Metal Hurlant Chronicles again. Why don't you send me a bunch of short stories and I'll pick some? And I did a couple for them. But how I came up with the ideas was another friend of mine said, well, just take two genres and mix them together and then see what flows. Take a Western and a horror story, take sci-fi and fantasy, mix them together. And that's kind of what I did, was take a murder mystery and add some magic and see what you got. And that's where the original Lucius Fogg story came from, which was called Three Little Maidens All in the Morgue. And that ended up being attached to when I wrote the first Fogg novel on Twitter, putting them together to make the first book, Deadly Creatures. So, again, I never wanted to write magic, and now that's one of the things I do best. It says, do you have a preferred genre or book you like to write? Adult, mystery, monsters? Deep down, I'm a mystery writer. I'm giving clues, I'm laying things out, I'm building up characters, but there's always going to be a mystery at the heart of what I write. And there are some exceptions. I co-wrote Dead Space for the 30 Days of Night universe with Steve Niles. And that was just the two of us had an idea that we wanted to put vampires into space. And we wrote it as just a 3-issue story. And it was almost like a slasher type story. But people kept saying afterwards, well, why were vampires put into space? All this stuff. And I started coming up with the idea. And of course, it was a mystery. It was this story I wanted to tell, like a murder mystery, or, unveil as I went along. And I pitched it to Steve, and Steve's like, I like it. I don't have time to work on that. Why don't you do it yourself? And that's what ended up becoming Spreading the Disease. another one of the 30 Days of Night miniseries. But at the heart of it was a mystery. And I didn't realize at first, but that's kind of what I write. When I did Shadowhawk, there was a mystery building. When I did Sinbad, someone had killed the Sultan of Brunei, or the Sultan, and Sinbad was accused of it. But who really killed him? How does he solve that? So there's always going to be a mystery at the heart of whatever I write, because I think that's what you need to have people come back. You got to give them clues, and you got to give them enough that they feel like they're earning their way, that they're part of the story. So yeah, that's my thing. I'm a mystery writer first and foremost. Doesn't have to be supernatural. It doesn't have to be superheroes. There's a mystery in the Blythe book, that they're trying to solve, but that's very different than the Fog books. If I'm writing a book and it's of my own making, there's going to be a mystery at the heart of it. So, as for like adult material or children's books or whatever genre, that doesn't matter to me. I just tell stories, And says, for someone who really isn't into horror movies, you do a good job with horror books like Headless. Well, I don't like horror movies. I don't like modern horror movies, because most of the ones I come across, they are more focused on scaring the audience, making them jump, getting them to spring out of their seats or scream. And to me, that's not good horror. If you're writing a novel or a comic book, you can't crank up the music and then have something jump out at the reader. It doesn't work. You have to tell something. You have to set the mood. You have to get them really into the story, and then you can scare them. You have to control the speed. Do you speed it up and get them turning pages and then bam, something big happens? Or do you slow it down and really make it detail oriented so they get really drawn in and then hit them with something? Or do you sell it through the fear of a character, how they're reacting to it? To me, that's much more scary, to listen to somebody as they're trapped in a submarine and the walls are crunkling in. They can hear them bend, shape, and the pressure is getting worse and worse. And it's not just of running out of air. It's that being trapped, and then water, you're going to drown, or you've got all these things that could kill you. That's much scarier to me than somebody leaping out at you. And says, I couldn't agree more, Dan. I love how you tell the story and paint the picture in the books. One would never know you're not a big horror guy. Yeah, again, I love the old Universal monster movies, the Hammer horror films, George Romero's original Night of the Living Dead, the first Halloween movie. Those are terrific because their mood, it's builds the stuff up. Nowadays, they take shortcuts. They jump out at you, or they do body horror, and that's just that one I don't get. It's like I'm really looking forward to all the stuff that the new DC universe is doing, but Clayface is not on my radar. I'll probably watch it, but it's not my thing. The last horror movie I went to see was for Lisa's daughter's birthday. She wanted us all to go see *Malignant*, and that movie was so bad that I started laughing at some points, and there was just some parts of it. It's like, are you kidding me? Are you really? This is the story you're telling? So, but I have nothing against people who love horror. My ex-wife, Debbie, huge horror fan. The first movie we ever saw on a date was Halloween 4. And of course, she's the one that got me to watch Halloween. Yeah. She's a huge horror fan. And she's also a Lovecraft fan. Those are her things. Me, not so much. But she was also a heavy metal fan. And she got me into heavy metal music. And I appreciate that a lot. I was never a fan of like Iron Maiden or Queensryche or Judas Priest or stuff like that. And started seeing it kind of through her eyes and seeing what good storytellers metal musicians are, and really started getting into it. And now, I love them. I saw Queensryche in concert. I saw Metallica in concert. I never got to see Iron Maiden. That would have been fun. But yeah. Oh, hey, Anthony. I appreciate you subscribing to the channel, Manzano. I do Sunday night podcasts most regularly. I do some other stories as well, popping on. But I want to get back to doing some of the other stuff I used to do on the channel, some of the psychology of villainies and stuff like that. But again, right now I got to crank out this fog book and get that going. But for Anthony and anybody else, I do have a newsletter. It is focused on Obsidian Moon right now. But if you join the newsletter, when we get to 250 people on the newsletter, I'm going to give away a digital copy of the first Lucius Fogg book. At 500, I have to double check these. So at certain points, I'm going to give away a digital copy of the first book. I'm going to give away a physical copy of the first book. And then I'll give away, at I think 1,000 people, a copy of all 3 digital books digitally. So, and I think at 1,500, I said I'll give everybody a copy of the first book, a digital copy. But Anthony says, is there a rock artist you think if he had lived a lot longer, the business would have been better for it today? Oh, wow. I'm going to give you 2 answers. I'm going to give you a more popular answer and then a more specific to me answer. Freddie Mercury is the more popular answer. Freddie Mercury was just an amazing singer, and Queen did some amazing songs. And where Brian May still puts out some good music on his own, Too Much Love Could Kill You. I mean, there's some good music there. And they do some decent stuff with some fill-in singers. Freddie Mercury is just amazing. As more specific to me, I'm a bass player. I own like 10 bass guitars. When I started learning, I dove deep into bass lore. And one of my favorite people I ever got to meet is Billy Sheehan, the bass player, who used to be with Mr. Big and Talus and the Winery Dogs. And he was David Lee Roth, bass player for Eat 'Em and Smile and stuff like that. So to me, he's a god among bass players. But the god among bass players is John Entwistle, bassist for The Who. And he created so much of what is modern bass playing that had he lived longer, I think he still would have added more and more. And yeah, I wish Entwistle was still around and still playing with the Who. So yeah. Ed says, "What would be the order to reading the Fog books?" Okay, we'll do that one with visuals. All right, the book you want to start with is Deadly Creatures. Deadly Creatures is my werewolf story. This was originally written live on Twitter, at least the majority of it. It was then combined with the novella I mentioned, Three Little Maidens All in the Work, to create the first Fog book, Deadly Creatures. Second book is Malicious Intent. This is a little more political, which works really well right now, and involves demons and black magic and sorcery, and probably one of the most evil characters I ever created, Kieran Drake. Third and final of the series is Educated Corpses. This was a book that I had the title for a long time. This is zombies. And it ties together the series well. It makes for a great trilogy. So Educated Corpses is third, Malicious Intent is second, Deadly Creatures is first. All these covers are by Jason Crowley, and Jason will be doing Jason Krager is what he goes by. And Jason will be doing the new novels covers as well. Also, for those of you that know, I did photography for a long time. The women on the covers are based off of different models I shot with. I gave photo reference to Jason. This is a model named Liz Ashley. This is Divinora Darling. Carly Aaron is the redhead. So just a little fun extra there. All right, so let's see what else was being said while I was hyping the books. My two are Ronnie James Dio and Bon Scott. Ronnie James Dio is fantastic. Voice, songwriting, yeah, just amazing. And just to think that Black Sabbath had Ozzy Osbourne and then Ronnie James Dio is just amazing to me. So those are guys who obviously can scout talent. Bon Scott, amazing voice. Just so sad that he died so young. Loved him. But I will admit that for the longest time, I didn't really understand what happened. So I heard Bon Scott and I heard Brian, and they just kind of melded to me. And then eventually I kind of got the ear to tell them apart. But yeah. Anthony says, Dan, I'm a big fan of vampires, but I want a blend of Dracula and 30 Days of Night vampires. Is there an author you could recommend that do that? Okay. First, there is a 30 Days of Night novel by a writer named Jeff Marriott, and Jeff is fantastic. So that's a good one to read. 30 Days of Night is kind of unique. Steve really came up with, I think of the movie 30 Days of Night, and what amazed me about it was that you could have taken vampires out and just made it any kind of invading force. This could have been World War II with the Nazis invading an island. And you could have told almost the same story, or most of the story beats. I'm trying to think of vampires that look like that. Um, what's the name? She does a book series called Sunglasses at Night or Sunglasses After Dark. Susan Collins. She also wrote a Vampirella book for me when I was doing the um, Dynamite books. Susan Collins. But wait, let me check that. Nancy A. Collins. Her Sunglasses After Dark book I've read, but she did a really good Vampirella book for Dynamite Books that's available on Amazon. I recommend that. I wrote a Vampirella book too, which I think is pretty good, but Nancy Collins is really good. Let's see. Ed's going to get the Fog books. I appreciate that. Also, I'm a big fan of werewolves, but I want the flip portrayal where the super intelligent like vampires instead of the dumb roots that they usually are. You have to think on that one. Let me get back to you on that one, Anthony. It says, do you have any art books of your photography? Yes. Again, on Amazon, there are 3 of my photography books. This is one of them. I focused on a particular model. This is Liz Ashley. Again, the cut model from the Deadly Creatures. There's 2 others as well. One is Carly Aaron, and then I can picture her, but I can't think of her name right now. So there's 3 of those on Amazon. And then also I did a black and white collection of nudes for a company called Goliath back in the early 2000s called Private Skin. And you should still be able to get that. I don't know about through Amazon, but eBay has copies, stuff like that. So ever try Cult of Dracula or Rise of Dracula by Richard Davis? Okay. There you go, Anthony. Ed is recommending. I knew those were going to fall. I had a feeling. Okay, I'll deal with those later. Is she the romance novelist? Because I'm trying to stay away from romance, if that's what you're going to recommend, Dan. Okay. Does Nancy put in romance? There really isn't much romance, if any, in the Vampirella book she wrote. The Vampirella book I wrote, Ed, is called The Blood Dragon. I have everything around my desk eventually. So that's it there. Vampirella, The Blood Dragon. And this actually ties in to Chinese lore. So you can check that one out again on Amazon. All the books I did through Dynamite Books are on Amazon, as well as my own stuff. Anthony says, Eddie is the type of vampires I want that blend Dracula and those savage vampires. Okay, Dan, as a person who writes vampire books, why do you think the genre is not as popular in comics when it comes to doing standalone stuff? Good question, Anthony. I think the thing is that horror in general, comics, novels, is secular. So what happens is a type of horror becomes popular. When Steve and Ben were doing 30 Days of Nights, there really wasn't a lot of other vampire books out there. So people weren't really tired of it, and it got their attention. And plus, Twilight was out, so it was very different than the glistening vampires. That was important. And it stayed big for a while. And then eventually that faded. And then the next thing came along. There was werewolves. And then after that, it was zombies. And Robert Kirkman's um, The Walking Dead. That took off and took off a lot longer than the normal genre, cycles go. But it's just basically somebody taps into something that hasn't been done in a while. It gets popular. Everybody jumps in on it. And then it gets blown out and people get bored of it. And then they find the next one. So vampires aren't big right now, but there's a good chance they'll come back around. You know? It says, if you have any stock of anything rather than five from this, that's not allowed. Let me look and see what I have left on. I think I have copies of Private Skin left. The other ones are print on demand through Amazon. And also, did the horror genre in general for both comics and novels get affected by the comic book code authority that was basically religious? Yes, absolutely. EC Comics was huge. It was outselling superhero books. It was the most popular thing. Horror books and crime books were the big thing before the comics code came along. And that is what got damaged the most, because they could tune down superheroes and they could do stuff like, oh, there'll be no blood, or we can't make cops the bad guys, stuff like that. And that didn't affect superhero books that much, which allowed them to continue. But when you had books like, the Tales from the Crypt and stuff like that, they couldn't do the stories that they were doing. They couldn't show somebody with an axe and a severed head on the cover anymore. That was all done away with. And it pretty much killed EC Comics. They're trying to do some new stuff with them right now, but, that was what took the most damage, were horror books. And it was years before anybody could do anything like it again. The closest anybody could get was, do you ever wonder why Morbius is known as the living vampire? That's because they had to find a loophole around the Comics Code Authority. Fishing for the penguin. They couldn't say he was a vampire, so he had to be a living vampire. That's the only way Marvel could do a vampire again in the 60s and 70s. They had to dance around that stuff. So yeah, the Comics Code Authority really messed with horror books to the point where it killed most of them. And it was years before they could really get back to doing what horror fans wanted. So, hope that answered your question, Anthony. Wow, that hour went by quick. I was going to talk about Eyes of Wakanda. Oh, Anthony says, is that how Werewolf by Night was created too, through the Comic Book Code Authority to get it? Yes. Basically, those early horror books were all done to go around the Comics Code Authority. They had to dance around the rules to get anything out. So all right, let me just real quick talk about Eyes of Wakanda. If you're a fan of Black Panther and Black Panther Wakanda Forever, it ties into that much better than I thought it would. Yes, it's a prequel series about the War Dogs, but it does lead right into the beginning of the first Black Panther movie. So if you were a fan of those movies, even if you're not an animation person, check it out. But this is really cool animation. It's different than what we normally get on television. It has its own unique style. It feels very appropriate for the material. And there's only 4 episodes, and they're all about 30 minutes. So it's a 2-hour commitment to some really good stuff. Plus, they introduce a past Iron Fist as well in one of the most fun episodes. To have a war dog going against an Iron Fist is a lot of fun. So I do recommend that, checking it out. I haven't had a chance to see Fantastic Four yet, but I did finally see Thunderbolts. Absolutely loved it. Thunderbolts was terrific. A lot of heart, just a lot of good story there. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are talking now about how, oh, Marvel isn't doing as well as it used to. Fans aren't going. The problem is they're doing a different type of story. The new Superman movie had a bunch of people going back multiple times. And that's because it's big, flashy, and fun. You watch the fight scenes, stuff like that. But you look at something like Thunderbolts, it's much more of a heart movie and a character-driven movie. It's people finding their place in the world. It's standing up for each other. And while those things make for a good movie, I don't know if it's a movie that you want to go back and watch again and again. And that's a lot of what we're seeing with Marvel right now. Their movies are parts of a bigger universe. They're not as big of spectacles as they used to be. You look at Shang-Chi and the first Black Panther, those did really well because they were rewatchable. They're ones you want to see again. But when you get into these sadder ones, these more heartfelt ones, do you really want to see it again? Look at some of the best movies ever made. Look at Schindler's List. Schindler's List is an amazing movie. How many times have you watched it? Did you see it in the theater and go, let's go see it again? No, because it's heart-wrenching. Thunderbolts, the scene with them rescuing Bob, going through all of that, that is just so much heart and stuff that you don't necessarily want to see that again. Or you do want to see Mr. Terrific and his T-Bolts beat the crap out of a bunch of soldiers, all to a dancey summer song. So I think it's hard to judge movies nowadays, looking at them and going, oh, it didn't make $1 billion. Did people like it? Did the critics like it? Did the fans like it? Did they go see it in the first place? Did they rewatch it? But then also you look at stuff like Fantastic Four and Superman, they're putting out so much extra marketing stuff, toys and crossovers and product placement, that they don't need to make that much money to be successful. So I wouldn't worry about the industry right now. I think it's just different than it was. Post-pandemic, not everybody is going to the theaters as much. And the number of people going to see movies multiple times, it's just not the same anymore. And ticket prices have gone up so much. It's like people trying to compare Man of Steel to Superman. And they're talking about, well, with inflation, Man of Steel made more. No, that's not true. Because it's looking at the ticket prices. But the thing is that how much it costs 5 times what it cost to go see Superman to what it cost to see Man of Steel. It didn't go up the same percentage as inflation. It went up exponentially because movie theaters have changed. They put in all the big plush seats and dinners and stuff like that, and they're charging more. It's not a simple matter of inflation. So the number of people that can go see a movie is less, and the number of people that can go see a movie multiple times is less. So you cannot compare Man of Steel to Superman because it's like comparing apples to oranges. You know, the best way to look at it is, what did people think of the movie? And the bottom line is, people walked out of Superman excited, wanting to see more. And people walked out of Man of Steel a little more divisive. The death of Zod really didn't sit well with some people. Things like that. So if you're going to compare them based on how you liked them. Did you see them both? You can like both of them. You could dislike both of them. It's your prerogative. But comparing them based off of box office numbers, stuff like that, just bottom line is the studio happy with the outcome, and are they going to make more? And I think it's pretty safe to say yes at this point. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. Ed's saying goodnight, so it's time to pull the plug. Anthony, thank you for joining. Everybody else, thank you. Remember, if you want to sign up for the mailing list and follow along with what's going on with the Obsidian Moon, that's on the front of my website. That's danwickline.com. So go there. It's the top article, has a link to sign up. And again, there's going to be giveaways involved. I'll explain more specifically. I think I did it a couple back, but I got to double check my numbers. But I will see you all soon. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Sunday. Good night, everybody. Good night, Mr. Nope.